Hello, this is Greg Slater from Colac, Otway, Shire. I'm the GIS coordinator, and I'm here to talk about mobile computing, or the history of mobile computing at Colac, Otway, Shire. Now, and the thing I hope you'll get out of this is a whole lot of lessons that we learned very early on, and most of those were hard learned and result of absolute disasters with mobile computing. So with a bit of luck, it'll educate and inform. So just to give you a bit of background, we've been doing mobile computing for quite a long time, but it's now been about 7 years since we had our last major disaster, which is a good thing in the IT world. It's a long time in the IT world, so we're feeling a bit smug about the whole process. But as with all things, when you're feeling smug, that's exactly when disaster happens. So we're just waiting for our next big disaster. But at the conclusion of this list of lessons learned and disasters, I'm hoping to show you a couple of useful applications and very successful ones that we've got going, and like I said, have been going for a long time now. Now this is a fairly boring slide that I'm showing you now. It's just a spreadsheet, but two things I'd like you to get out of it. One, that down the left-hand side is the time scale, and you'll notice that there's a whole lot of red blobs up the top of it, and they're all our failures. The green stuff down the bottom, which is 2013, are all successes. So you'll notice that at the start we had a lot of disasters, and it's been a long time since we've had one. The other thing I'd like you to get out of that slide is that there's about 20 things across the top of that spreadsheet, and they're all the different things that we've tried to use mobile for. So you can see some of them we've failed and haven't gone back to, but most of them we either started off and succeeded, or we failed and then had another go and got it right the second and third time, which is probably the most common experience for mobile computing implementations. So now I'm going to quickly run you through some of these disasters just to give you an idea of lessons that we've learned. Now the first one we had a go at was in 2001. We did a weed application. We bought a highly accurate GPS, which we were very pleased with, but and we thought it would just be a matter of going out and picking up weeds, but what we didn't realise was the software that accompanied that hardware didn't really code for data capture at all. It was disaster. So what happened was it was so hard to use that our weed people just ended up getting sick of it and going back to using pen and paper. So we had another shot at it in 2003, and this time we used some other software, data capture software, much better made, but as is common, we skimped on training our botanist. We thought that this would be a pretty straightforward task. Turned out it wasn't, and just out of ignorance she left the hardware locked in a drawer for a couple of months and lost all the data. And the sad thing about that was she totally lost confidence in the system, and again that was a utter failure. The next thing we tried was a local laws application for branches overhanging footpaths, and we thought this is a pretty simple task, so we picked on it as opposed to some of the other local laws things which were more complex. So we did this application. Unfortunately it was so low priority that the management decided they weren't going to do that job at all anyhow. So again, we hadn't done the business case, and it was just another terrible failure. And interestingly about that one, we have never gone back to it because, again, it's just never been high enough priority, even though local laws, it's still one of the things that they claim that they have to look after. Next go we had street trees. We had a street tree application in our big corporate system called Fujitsu. They got taken over by Authority, and Authority offered to duplicate that application. And the good thing about that was that they'd put in a mobile mobile part to it, which Fujitsu had never done. So the upshot of it was quite good. We actually got a mobile application, and the users started to use it, because when it had no mobile application, the users had no use for it, because that was the one major thing that they needed to be able to use it out in the field and track down the details of trees. So we had this application sitting there for years without ever being used. Next came a very expensive and detailed application we did for septic tanks. Now, the disaster about that was that the user, what turned out, was he was a tinkerer, and he liked the idea of the technology, and we did as I said, quite a sophisticated implementation. Unfortunately, I'd never had any intention of using it, and despite the fact that the business case was dead solid and he actually needed to use it, once the novelty had worn off, he just lost interest in it, wouldn't use it at all. That was followed, we had another go at local laws in 2005. We did a dog and cat sort of animal tracking application, and with that we had the opposite effect. The application worked brilliantly, actually. It worked well for about 2 years, and about the third year, again, it was on little HP iPads, so they're sort of old technology now, but they were quite useful at the time. But after about 3 years, the hardware began to deteriorate, and because the manager of that area was a bit of a technophobe and was a bit threatened by all this technology, he decided that if the hardware wasn't going to work anymore, rather than getting new hardware, he'd just scrap the whole system and go back to using pen and paper, which, you know, a lot of people who are averse to change go down that path. They just look for an excuse to finish something. The last disaster we had wasn't that long ago, actually, but it wasn't a real disaster either. What it was we needed to do a roadside vegetation application because of some legal stuff that was going on, and we had to go at it ourselves, and didn't quite do the job. We had a botanist providing us with the data who'd gone out and done the mapping and provided the data as a package, but it wasn't very user-friendly for our staff. But so we thought about scrapping it, and then we had to talk to the guy, and turns out he had some wonderful data, but it was hidden in his data capture system, and he wasn't passing it on to us. So we actually redid the whole application and actually got him to use our application with our, you know, meeting our requirements, and it worked beautifully. And so that was, as I said, that was probably the most recent failure. So in summary, some of the lessons we learned. Well, overarching all of that was the problems with software and hardware that a small council has. We found we were overreaching ourselves often because we were doing this, and we were heading off in different directions. So what we found was if you've got limited resources, use limited tools. Just pick the tools that you know well and that work and that you're happy with, and don't be distracted by people coming up with fancy stuff that's going to cost you an arm and a leg and require someone specialist to run it. So in our case, those tools were things like, tools that a lot of people have, like SQL 2005, MapInfo Pro. We use MapInfo Pro because we're a small council, whereas the bigger councils tend to use ARC. We had the Authority Mobile, which which came with our big corporate system. We had the GBM mobility suite, which we used for a lot of our applications already, and just recently we've had users demanding iPads and smartphones, so we've standardised on iPads and the Samsung Galaxy for our phones, and our mobile hardware is we're at the moment using GPAC PDAs. We'll probably swap that in the next year or two as they need replacing. The other thing about the software is that we use two different sorts. We use the Authority Mobile for the non-spatial stuff and the GBM stuff for the spatial, and the reason is that it gives us two fairly particular options of things that are made for the things that they do. Other more specific lessons are, and we found this out early on with our Wii application, is use software with date-time fields, because one of the things we did was keep overwriting our data, but if it's got a date-time field it will never do that. It saves you heaps of money in data, which is where a lot of the expense is. Similarly with hardware, we choose one tablet, one PDA, one smartphone, and we pretty much keep to that. We don't let people go out and buy stupid stuff. And lessons as of the overhanging branches: always do a business case. If nothing else, it focuses your own mind on why you're doing this thing. It's always a good question to ask at the start: why the hell am I doing this job? And finally, consult with your users, particularly when you've got the technophobes and the tinkerers, and just make sure you know who they are and why they're doing it, and that they're that they've got the best interests of the business at heart. Look for efficiencies with the fieldwork. The money's all in the fieldwork and the data, so look for look up tables in forms, data packs for mobile devices. That saves you money. And if you can, try and get sometimes connected applications. If you're out in the bush, that's really important, because online applications are just useless, because there's large parts of the world where you can't go with them. What about the future? The future is mostly about mobile stuff at this Shire. We've just done an IT strategy, and nearly 50% of our projects are going to be mobile, which is a bit of a change. It's a huge surge really in use. We're looking for next year, as soon as our GTACs run out, we're looking at Androids and Apple devices for hardware as well. Now I'm going to start we talked about all the failures, so I'll talk about some success stories, and there's some brilliant ones. The first one is actually not one I know a lot about, except for the history, so I'm going to start off with the history of it and then hand over to our fire prevention officer, Kale, who will run you through the mobile part of that. So there's three of them we're going to do. We're going to do fire prevention notices, the road corridor applications, and the biodiversity stuff with the roadside vegetation. So fire prevention notices, this is an application where we are required by law to get people to cut unruly blocks, anything that might burn in the summer. I can't name the act, but it's a job that all councils have to do in Victoria, and we've historically we did it with big bits of paper with maps on them and little bits of paper with forms on them, and that worked very well when we were only doing about 400 or 500 inspections per year. But in about 2008 the council decided that they weren't doing it properly, and decided to up the number of inspections that they were doing to 9,000 a year, which just become totally impractical for one person with big paper maps to do. It just wasn't physically possible to drive around to that many properties with that many maps. So coincidentally, or not coincidentally, our inspector retired at that stage. I think he saw the writing on the wall. And we got a new guy who was a bit more technically abled, and we built an application. I built it in-house, used GBM Mobile and Microsoft Access in our infringement module. And it was good. I liked it because I built it, but the trouble was that it lacked the legal rigour. And it turned out our new inspector was also quite a legal, and he pointed out all the things that we would get kicked out of court for when we took these matters to court. So we had to declare that one a failure. So we had a second go at it, and this time we used GBM Office and SQL 2005, and that worked beautifully. The only problem was that the guy out in the field still had a lot of uploading and downloading at the end of the day to synchronise the databases, and those sort of people don't tend to be good at that. So there was always a glitch, and I was always called in to try and fix it, and it was wasting a lot of people's time. So we had a third go at it, and in 2012 we introduced a sometimes connected element to GBM Office, and it works beautifully. And our inspectors love it because they can do their synchronisation in the field. And there's a lot of other good things about it. You can, you know, it tracks which roads they've been down, it tracks the thing, but I'll leave that for our inspector to talk to you about. But just before I do, we had some specific requirements for this application. It was certainly the forerunner of many. People have been trying to copy it now for a few years. So we had a fair list of specifications. You know, they had to be spatial, they had to be GPS enabled. It had to be simple enough for a fire inspector to use. Had cameras for taking pictures, and be able to do that synchronisation in the field.